Study rocks, not race. Dr. Keith Rowley. You have no moral authority to lecture Prime Minister Kamla Persad Bissessar on race. An editorial by Professor Wall Street. Dr. Keith Rowley has taken to Facebook to accuse Prime Minister Kamla Persad Bissessar of endangering the social and racial stability of this country, of being out of control, and in his most theatrical flourish, of being a modern Marie Antoinette who took bread out of the mouths of tens of thousands. It is a remarkable performance from a man who governed this country for a full decade and in that time did more damage to the economic well-being of Black Trinidadians than any leader in living memory. Before Keith Rowley lectures anyone on race, he owes his own people an accounting. Over 10 years, the descendants of the enslaved in his party's own strongholds grew poorer, not richer. His grandest promises to them evaporated, and their communities decayed into the most dilapidated in the nation. A man with that record has forfeited every right to pose as the guardian of racial justice. Here are 10 reasons why Keith Rowley should retire quietly to his rocks and leave the lecturing to others. 1. Black poverty exploded on his watch. Under the Kamla Persad Bissessar-led People's Partnership from 2010 to 2015, the share of Black people living below the poverty line stood approximately around 17.3%. By the end of the PNM's tenure in 2025, that figure had ballooned to 26.3%. An increase of roughly 52%. Read that again. Black poverty grew by half under a prime minister who now styles himself the defender of Black people. He does not mention this in his Facebook sermons. It is the single most damning fact of his decade, and his silence on it speaks louder than any post. 2. Most of the people he impoverished were his own supporters. The communities that suffered that surge in poverty were overwhelmingly PNM strongholds, the loyal Black base that voted for Rowley election after election. He did not merely preside over Black decline in the abstract. He presided over the decline of the very people who trusted him most. To then accuse Kamla of taking bread out of the mouths of the poor is projection of the highest order. He should look in the mirror before he reaches for Marie Antoinette. 3. His Make the Rich Richer doctrine told you exactly whose side he was on. Rowley publicly declared he had no problem making the rich richer so they could create opportunities for the poor. A decade later, we can measure that theory against reality. The rich, including his well-known Syrian financiers, did fine. The poor Black communities at the bottom of the socio-economic ladder stayed at the bottom. Trickle-down was not an accident of his government, it was its stated philosophy. And the trickle never reached Laventille. 4. He promised Laventille and environs $100 million and delivered a fraction of the hope. Rowley promised the Black population of Laventille and its environs $100 million for infrastructure and economic development. That money never materialized as promised. He asked those communities for their loyalty and their votes and gave them a headline figure that dissolved into nothing. What is his excuse for that broken promise to the very people he now claims to protect? Until he answers, his concern for Black people is theater. 5. He cannot name a single socio-economic indicator where Black Trimbagonians ranked among the top 3. Here is a challenge Rowley cannot meet. During his 10-year reign, name one socioeconomic statistic: income, employment, home ownership, educational advancement, wealth, on which Black Trimbagonians ranked in the top 3 of this country's groups. There isn't one to boast of. A leader genuinely devoted to his people's advancement leaves behind measurable progress. Rowley leaves behind a challenge he cannot answer and a record he would rather nobody examined. 6. Under him, PM strongholds became the most dilapidated constituencies in the land. Drive through Laventille, Morvant, and the other loyal PM heartlands after 10 years of PM government. And you see the truth his rhetoric hides: crumbling infrastructure, neglected communities, and abandoned promise. These are the places that never wavered in their support for him, and they were rewarded with dilapidation. A man who let his own base rot has no standing to lecture anyone about caring for a people. 7. He called himself the blackest man in Trinidad and Tobago, then governed as if it meant nothing. Rowley was fond of declaring he could be the blackest man in Trinidad and Tobago. Identity, though, is not policy. Proclaiming your blackness while black poverty climbs by half on your watch is not leadership, it is branding. He wore his heritage as a slogan, while the material conditions of the people who share it deteriorated. That is the opposite of the racial solidarity he now pretends to champion. 8. He is the author, not the opponent, of racial grievance politics. This is a man with a long, documented history of racially and personally inflammatory rhetoric from the nation's highest office. For him to now cast himself as the sober guardian of racial stability, alarmed by division, is breathtaking. Rowley did not just tolerate racial friction in our politics. Over the years, he actively stoked it. The arsonist does not get to lecture the fire brigade. 9. His Marie Antoinette theatrics insult the very people he failed. Comparing Kamla to Marie Antoinette while invoking starving hordes is designed to sound like compassion for the poor, but the poor, black, disadvantaged communities he claims to speak for grew hungrier under him, not her. Weaponizing the imagery of starvation when your own decade produced the worst black poverty figures in the nation's history is not moral clarity. It is a cynical borrowing of other people's suffering to score a political point. 10. He mistakes retirement grievance for public service. Rowley had 10 years, the full power of the state, and the unwavering loyalty of the black communities he now claims to defend. He could have delivered economic emancipation and chose not to. Now out of office, he pours his energy into Facebook broadsides about race and stability rather than answering for the record he left behind. That is not the conduct of an elder statesman. It is the conduct of a man running from his own decade. In conclusion, so here is the plain truth. No one did more over the last 10 years to leave black Trinbagonians poorer, more neglected, and more taken for granted than Keith Rowley. And most of the affected were his own faithful supporters. Black poverty rose from around 17.3% to 26.3% on his watch, a roughly 52% jump. The $100 million promised to Laventille never came. His party's strongholds became the most dilapidated in the country, and he cannot name a single socio-economic indicator on which black people led. A man carrying that record does not get to appoint himself the protector of racial harmony and lecture Kamla Persad Bissessar on race. Answer the questions first, Dr. Rowley. The poverty, the broken $100 million promise, the decayed strongholds, the missing statistics. Until you can, do the country a favor and enjoy your retirement doing what you were actually trained to do, studying rocks, not race.